Hello there, Thomas Lancaster here, and what I'm excited to share with you today is work I've been doing with undergraduate students at Imperial College London on academic integrity. And what I hope you can do is take some ideas from this presentation and see how you could apply them in your own institution or in your own context. And if you're a student watching this presentation, feel free to feed the ideas back to the staff you work with, to your subject area, and see if you can take the lead in making these changes. I should briefly introduce myself. I'm Dr. Thomas Lancaster. I'm a senior teaching fellow in the Department of Computing at Imperial College London in the UK. I'm mainly responsible for student support roles, but I'm probably best known to the people watching this video for my research into academic integrity. Work I've been doing now for over 20 years, looking at this problem and looking at the opportunities from all kinds of different perspectives. You're more than welcome to connect with me and to contact me on Twitter at Dr. Lancaster. Feel free to tweet interesting ideas you've heard from this session. Feel free to tweet and talk about quotes, to share the slides or images from them. It's great to get this information out to as wide an audience as possible because it's intended to be useful for everyone here. I've mentioned the word students a few times, so let's pick up on that and take a look at these young people. These were tweets I made as part of the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating, which took place in 2020, the fifth one of those. But these are actually stills from a 20-hour series of videos talking about academic integrity that we've run alongside the event and alongside we ran videos because we couldn't hold face-to-face events in the way that we might normally do for this promotional opportunity there. And we ran this event with the International Centre for Academic Integrity. And lots of students shared their views with us throughout that time. Some of them live through their cameras, some pre-recorded. You see some examples on the slide from students in Canada, from a student in India. The student in India is slightly longer, talking about the people he knows who have set up a business doing work for other students, contract cheating in my area of research. The students at the left from Ontario were worried about what happens if you can buy and sell grades. And our students are talking about academic integrity. They are talking about the challenges. They are talking about why it matters to them. And that's why we have to continue to involve them in the discussion about academic integrity. And that's why I have this question to put to you to think about throughout this presentation. How can we better work with our students as our partners in academic integrity? It's something which is integral to the work that I do. Even outside of academic integrity, I want students to be involved in the material I teach, in the way they're assessed, to think about how to improve things, to think about how to draw them in and interest them in their subject area. But when we're discussing academic integrity as a concept, to many students, it's quite hard to visualize. It's something they think, oh, yes, I know that. You don't need to drill this idea down my throat anymore. How do we get those students involved who don't understand academic integrity or aren't interested in it? What alternative approaches can we use? At the same time, how can we do more with the students who really feel strongly and passionate about this area and want to be involved further? I'll give you an example. Think about the typical way we teach academic integrity in a university or school setting. And I'll say teach academic integrity because I don't believe that we always even use those words. If you're part of the academic integrity community, it may be second nature, but many other people will talk instead about plagiarism. And really, what they're interested in is making sure that students know how to write in their own words, how to quote, probably how to find information, how to reference correctly, and the level of checks that the exact format of referencing is correct are going to far outweigh any knowledge or understanding we expect from students about why do they need to do this in the first place. It's not just for us to catch them out. And there may hopefully somewhere in there be a discussion about the fundamental values of academic integrity, but I really don't think those are all that common. We want students, of course, to act truthfully and ethically and to respect their sources, but do we always teach about that? And even if we do, can we say for sure that other staff will say the same things to their own students and take those positive messages forward to them? Quite frankly, we can't, because ultimately, I know what students are told a lot of the time is do not cheat. I put cheat in big red letters there because that's the word that stands out. It is an important word, it's an emotional word. It creates that connection with people. It creates sometimes that level of disgust if other people are cheating. It can create that idea of temptation to go with that as well. But we don't really talk about academic integrity that much. We talk about academic misconduct, academic dishonesty, and student cheating. So I got thinking about this and what I could do to take this discussion to the next level alongside the other work I've been doing with students. And here is what I asked myself. What if we could cover more with the students? What if rather than just saying these are the rules, these are what you do, we could have grown up, nuanced conversations. We could think about academic integrity in a much wider context, not just the context to the student, but the context to the wider community, to other educators, to their peers, to employers, to the administration, to the world. From there, I mentioned earlier on that I'm an academic integrity researcher, but why don't students do academic integrity research for themselves, especially if they are passionate and care about these areas? Is it because we've just never asked them about this or considered that it might be possible? Do we even think that every member of staff would know how to go and conduct academic integrity research? It's really a specialist area for that. So how to conduct that type of research is really important as well. Then students will often say, well, I'm only one student, I can't do anything. I would like to change that mindset. We can think of the fundamental values and the sixth value of courage, that individual students can accomplish a lot. They can accomplish more as part of a community or as part of a group looking to enact change. And we know how much change students can enact. We've seen this throughout the pandemic with the various concessions students have quite rightfully got to improve their grades and improve their performance in that process. And we should continue to talk about the fundamental values of academic integrity as well, because they are so important and essential for everything we do in this field. So that was a question I set myself, and for a long time now I've been looking for an opportunity to do something about that. And quite thankfully, the right opportunity came along at Imperial College London just over a year ago, when Imperial has had a new teaching and learning strategy, as many universities have, introduced a new set of compulsory modules for almost every student joining the institution from last year, i.e. September 2019 onwards. It's called the I Explore scheme. There's 4 different types of modules students can choose from that scheme. They're a very well established strand called Horizons, which had been available as optional modules before, covering things like foreign languages. There's a business strand for people wanting to go in that direction. There's a project strand. And there is a STEM strand, which I will come on to shortly. But about a year ago, I was given the opportunity to pitch a module for this scheme to get some support to develop it as well. Well, allegedly some time support. I'm not sure that ever arrived in practice, but being passionate about this area, I made sure I could take this forward. And these have gone through a process now and were run for the first time in 2020 to 2021. Some of the modules, like mine, have already run in the first term. Some other modules are running now in the spring term. But these are only available to a selection of programs or courses which agree to offer them to year 2 students. There'll be a lot more students will take them next year in their third year. And that's just to do with the structure of the university and how these modules have fit best into different courses. The strand I got involved with was the STEM strand. That's STEM with a double M, Science, Technology, Engineering, Maths and Medicine. Imperial College London is a STEM institution, so focuses on the sciences, engineering, technology, a large medical school there as well. And it does also do business courses, but many of the subjects that other institutions would offer aren't available at Imperial. It is one of the elite Russell group of institutions in the UK, very top of the league tables there. And in the guidance of what a STEM module is, came this phrase: a topical area of science being pioneered by our researchers that are not currently offered within our undergraduate courses. Well, academic integrity fits perfectly in that strand. It's certainly not taught from a research perspective at undergraduate level. In fact, I don't know anywhere in the world where it's taught at undergraduate level as a research option there. And so to me, it looked absolutely perfect. As I mentioned, I got this accepted there, and it joined the modules which have been offered this year. I've put them up on the screen so you can see the range of them that were available. Students had to choose, I believe, prioritize 3 of these, and then they were allocated to one of them. They could choose from the other streams as well that I mentioned. These were the STEM ones, and we went through quite a long and detailed development process following some very established pedagogical ways of creating these courses, following defined processes, following the UK's quality assurance systems, which have a lot of built-in checks and moderation there to make sure everything is fair and consistent. A very positive part of academic integrity, as it's done in many countries, not consistently around the world, but I think it's worth mentioning that because I know people watching this could come from different cultures, different environments. But I remember one thing that I thought as I saw these were there are a lot of these modules that I'd be interested to take myself. So if a student goes ahead and chooses an academic degree in STEM, which maybe doesn't sound as exciting, then I've accomplished something by getting them engaged with that subject area. The small benefit it had was being academic integrity does fall first alphabetically, so the very top of the list. So it does mean people tend to see that there. But these modules ran, so 3 of these ran in the autumn term or the fall term in the North American context, and the rest of these have run or are running in the spring term. So being an autumn term module, I was also rather a guinea pig as well to make sure this worked. I mentioned already there was a very thorough design, development, and approval processes, lots of workshops, mostly held in person. We've got students involved to discuss the ideas and to feed in as well. And we also had to work to the overall I Explore guidelines, some of which I put on the slide, but essentially this is material that goes above and beyond the course that they're in. Uh, Most students will have to take an I Explore module from outside their home department. So a computing student on Department of Computing couldn't take one of the computing options, although academic integrity thankfully stands far enough outside the standard computing curriculum as well that this would be open to them. But computing is a group that can't do this until year 3. So the first time students will be able to do this is next year. But these modules are expected to include project work, interdisciplinary teams, that's the whole idea of being open to different areas, use of different cultures and perspectives, some of those from the student, some of those externally, and the development of communication skills. So they almost all have presentations and areas like that in those, which may not sound that exciting to some of you, but Imperial is very much a traditional exam-based curriculum. Very little coursework in most courses. How you do depends on how you do at those big exams at the end of the year. We did have formal learning outcomes, which do take those overarching aims and bring those forward. You can see them on the slide. Now, I've come from the teaching and learning family and background, so I'm very used to doing things like writing learning outcomes. I have teaching qualifications, but at the university I'm at, those are actually quite rare because it is a very research intensive university. So for me, the idea of putting these together, and indeed a lot of the curriculum design, came quite easily to me, partly because I've done so much course development before, written all the documentation, led those processes at universities as well, but I could see it was completely new to some of the more research focused lecturing staff I was working with. But I very much wanted to bring in these ideas about reflection, about students applying what they were discovering and investigating to their own context, to their own background. We have a wide range of student backgrounds at Imperial, a very large international community as well. They're to their own discipline, to their own level of study, bearing in mind some people only done 1 year of study. Some people have done more. People have studied different things before they arrived at Imperial. To bring in the research agenda, to make students feel they're part of a community, to look at research design there as well, to look at critical appraisal, communication, both in written forms and spoken forms. That actually, learning outcome 5, communicating with non-specialist audience, is quite tricky. Didn't quite master that this year, so it's something to work on, which I'll come back to. And personal evaluation in that team. So this gives a framework. There are all kinds of mappings of learning outcomes to assessments alongside this, and time planning as well. This is a standard 125 working hour module for students that is made up or expected to be made up of 10 weeks attending classes for 2 hours a week and then 105 hours of work in their own time, which I expected to accompany with some supervision support meetings for students working on a research project. Now, that was the planned way this would operate over that first term, from weeks 2 to the final week of term there. But something came and threw that schedule out. It was the pandemic, and my department moved entirely online. So, no choice to go and teach the students in a room or anything like that. We had to move this very quickly to online delivery. I made the decision, rather than try and do 2 live hours a week in the original timetable slot, which was a consistent free slot across the university, I decided to largely flip the curriculum, partly to help all our students who were in time zones outside the UK, because that 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. slot is after midnight for students in Asia because of the time difference there. Uh, I developed this as largely a Blackboard based course with videos, with short reflective tasks, just purely for formative reasons as well, with links to recommended reading, including academic papers, and with links to events that were going on as well. I managed to time this quite nicely around the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating, we've already mentioned, and there are quite a few other things going on during this time period as well. And then to include some meetings on Zoom with discussion type activities, small amount of presentation, but try to do that separately, and support from me as a supervisor for the research groups. Now, that was the original plans for the revised format. It was not as simple as that because the pandemic had a way of throwing other challenges out as well. Biggest challenge of all, the size of the cohort. We got 8 students, which was fewer than I would have liked, but a nice number in terms of being 2 groups of 4 there. But it meant I really had to set aside the idea I had that the students would do a lot of peer review because they all knew each other. Can't really do that anonymously, and they talked to each other. And in fact, 7 of the 8 students were from the Department of Medicine, the School of Medicine. In other words, they were trainee doctors on already an intensive course, as anyone who's spoken to trainee doctors as well, they will say they are learning no end of things. It's one of those areas we do have to learn a lot of terminology and remember this as well. And then one student from maths. It was a nice diverse group in terms of student backgrounds, in terms of cultures, in terms of people being based around the world. Most of them were still based in London because the medical school was one of the few parts of Imperial that still had students having to go in because of it being a very practical subject, although it did turn out that one student was based in Malaysia, which I only found out very late on in the process there. And unfortunately, there were some late nights for him, but he seemed quite used to it for whatever unfortunate reason that was. We had all kinds of problems with timetabling there, which one reason I said we were guinea pigs, for instance, uh, students being in a lab, taking anatomy classes, and not being able to join the class at the scheduled time. I still tried to stick with the 4 p.m. sessions, but largely only went on to not every week, and largely went to 5 p.m. there for the taught discussion type aspects. And there is a lot of cleaning up to do after an anatomy session, and there's not necessarily anywhere they can quickly join a Zoom session. So we worked around this, did the best for the students there. And the idea of basing this around existing research, case studies, things for students to think about, didn't work perfectly because the students didn't always have the time to dive in to look at the background material in the way I'd like in a flipped curriculum. So I I do know that not all the students looked at all the material. Some students looked at very little material. One thing I said very early on is that I do appreciate you all have a difficult life this year. You have different reasons for having chosen this particular module. I'm not here to judge you, and I want you to get the most out of it you can. The good thing is when they came onto their research stage, we saw some excellent work going through at that point. But one thing I found out very quickly from the medical students is that some people had chosen this because they'd studied medical ethics in the first year. They expected more of the same, but academic integrity and ethics are not quite synonymous with terms with one another. There, I think some people thought it might be quite easy. I think some people were really, really engaged and interested and wanted to be pushed further. and also to get a head start on the research material they'll do afterwards. Now, the maths view, I didn't get quite as good a picture, but there's slightly less ethics as far as I can understand it in the first year of maths for that. What did I put in? Well, I ended up changing this original 10-week schedule to be topic based, although the material largely didn't change. So content is set in the module specs, but I had planned to bring in a few guest speakers um, there. In one way, I had an advantage with it being online, could get hold of anyone from around the world, but I decided quite early on, but I'd met the students and seen that they had to be quite strategic with their involvement as well, to only bring in one guest speaker for that, uh, and to bring in some student guest speakers. But I used a topic based way of presenting this instead of just splitting into 10 weeks. The main difference is some of these case study type weeks with the external speakers and me going in areas in more detail would have lasted longer. In fact, there was another complication I forgot to mention that was part of this as well, and that was that the medical students were going to have to go into hospitals for placement, and so I had to bring everything forward. Then later on, it turned out those placements didn't go ahead because of the pandemic, and they asked me to move things back again, which I did because I had more time, and I wanted more time to concentrate on the research. I had to be quite agile, but look particularly at some major areas of academic integrity research there, particularly for accessible papers for students. That brought in my own research on contract cheating, which tied in nicely with the week of the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating. Uh, I've worked with quite a few undergraduate students on summer research projects. I got the students to present, so uh, they pre-recorded some material and they joined a student panel, which I think worked really well because the students on the module liked talking to my previous students who I'd worked with one to one and picking their brains and running through ideas. Irene Glendinning came in, good friend of mine. I think she'll be known to many people in the community. They're one of the prominent UK research and academic integrity, to talk about some of her research, also to relate it um, to life in general. And then we mostly spent the second half of the module working on the research project and me guiding each group. The assessment, very early on, I just gave a short presentation, pre recorded, and asked the students what they thought about academic integrity. There, just a one page reflected summary. There were some more guidelines than that. Most of the marks came from the group research presentations, which were presented as a presentation on Zoom at the end with some questions. Then I asked the students to do a final reflective summary to see how their views of academic integrity had changed. I was pleased to see they had changed and developed as a result of the module doing the research. I also asked them to do an individual blog post as well to try and communicate their work to a wider audience. These reflected, to me, this looks like a lot of assessment, because I've worked in universities where the idea is you don't want to over-assess students, but Imperial is quite different. I still managed to take this down a lot there. So these, the summaries, the blog post are a page each, no more. I gave them video feedback for the first summary, audio feedback for the others. In fact, some written feedback on the blog post. I tried a variety of methods. I'm not sure any of those worked any better than the others, because some students I could tell really engaged with that. I know one student really liked their feedback and they had shared that with their friends, and we got some nice discussions going. I could see the number of views on YouTube was a lot more than I would expect. But I do know there was one student who never watched their feedback. But that is how it goes. We did cover this in discussion as well, many of the same areas, so hopefully useful things went in there. Overall, the marks didn't really matter to the students because on their transcript they have to pass this module, but it doesn't count towards their overall degree classification, and the standard pass mark for a UK module is 40%. The standard equivalent of a first class mark is 70%. So some countries, universities, people grade on different scales. That may give you an idea. there, but essentially it is just a scale that we are working to there. Uh, but all the students did very well, and they were obviously taking some personal pride in this too. I did get some input, as I mentioned. We had Irene in to do a live webinar. We had my student panel. They pre-recorded some videos. We had a live Q&A session. I asked some questions. The students asked them some questions. That to me was one of the most useful things. Irene came back to watch the presentation at the end as well, and really valuable input. And quite usefully, we had the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating, October 21st, 2020. Fell about 4 weeks in. That was another reason I did bring some material slightly forward so students could engage with that. Of course, I put together a really nice, I think a really nice overview of the research as well for students to go with that there. We had 2 group projects handed in at the end. One of them from the group of medical students, very interested in looking at research fraud, checking the changes, showing that the number of papers that have been published have gone up every year. The percentage of retracted papers has stayed roughly constant over that time there. The other group worked particularly on academic integrity guidelines, on policies and procedures. We encouraged them to focus on a manageable number of guidelines to look at, but they showed some very different styles of language being used in them, whether they're written aimed at the students or aimed at the governance there as well. I'm very much encouraging both of these groups to publish this and take it forward, because there is good work there which they can show more widely, and we have some nice interesting discussions along the way talking about their research methods. One thing I did push as part of this process was to try and use existing data where possible rather than go through the ethical approval process and ask for surveys and areas like that, just because of the time delay and making it harder to take it forward there. I think the students liked this. They said some nice things about the module there. Of course, likely I'd like to just compare some of the things the students said at the start of the module when they were just getting going, thinking about academic integrity, with some of the things they said at the end. I've slightly paraphrased things because I didn't set this up as a formal research project. A view that was expressed a lot was students saying, oh, I thought academic integrity was only for students, but actually it is for the whole community. And it's something we don't always push, and also it came back there that it certainly isn't pushed that way in a lot of the guidelines given to students about processes, or even worse, about penalties, punishments, sanctions, outcomes, whatever terminology you use. People realizing the importance of trust in their profession and how that stems on from their university studies. Quite a few students talked about personal observations, bringing in the idea of courage with that, including somebody who knew about a friend who had reported cheating. There was other personal examples given as well, but really drawing from those experiences, because academic integrity is so individual, and that's what we wanted from this. So much more reflection at the end of the process. It had made a difference there. Some of it we got to try and address that came from the research projects, idea of the negative language surrounding academic integrity. It's something I've been doing some work on separately. It may be published by the time you see this video, but the students got to see some of this early on as part of case studies in the module there. Students talking about their duty, feeling they're part of a community to help other students. The idea that students should question their field and what is done about academic integrity in that area, what changes are being made, how is everyone in the community involved, how is academic integrity ensured there. The idea that academic integrity is nuanced. You can't just have questions with a yes, no answer. You have to bring in those difficult conversations. You have to bring in different people's opinions. You have to be able to trust and value them. That really feeds back as well to the original intention of the STEM scheme too. And this thing that stood out, which stands out to me as well, that academic integrity research is more difficult than expected. And yeah, research in general is more difficult. Academic integrity research sounds like it could be easy. Just asking people if they cheat, aren't you? That's what people say to me. Actually, it is quite difficult to do it well and to see the different research methods. I've got a whole host of materials now for this, which I will need to adapt for next year, but I can do much more with for that as well. I've reflected on this as well. There's a lot more that I could say that is being fed back, process type issues, but I was really impressed by the students and their involvement and their research, their initiative, the kind of questions they wanted to answer. Although one thing that hadn't really occurred to me in advance was how interested the students would be in research integrity. And I think that's partly because of the medical makeup of the students, because I'm not that experienced at teaching medical students, although I found it really interesting, enlightening from my own perspective as well that that happened. But they have had this idea that's pushed that if medical research isn't trusted as part of their wider ethics, they're wider problems. They're really interested in working in that area. So I think I need to add more work on research integrity and have that consideration about where do we draw the line between academic integrity and research integrity, bearing in mind we're part of the same community. But my personal interest is much more the educational and pedagogical side. Um, at the same time, I didn't put that much content up really, and I tried to give a variety of ways that students could engage with it, to help people with different learning modalities, to bring in the external speakers. And the external involvement from Irene and from the students worked really well, probably better than my original plan, which was to have several guest speakers from academia there. And hopefully my group from this year can become guest speakers next year as well and motivate another and mentor, motivate another level of students there. But as you put more and more material in, people are entering this not really knowing much about academic integrity there, other than it is this idea I mentioned earlier on: do not cheat, learn how to reference. How do we balance the content and make it manageable? May have been worse under the pandemic situation. And I will throw in one more idea. I mentioned about public engagement blog posts. The students tried. I didn't give them a whole huge amount of guidance for this. I know it's a tough skill to develop. I've tried to do this with some of my ethics teaching and computing as well there. And we need to really work on engaging with different audiences. Something useful for the people of medicine too, but I need to think about how I provide that guidance, again, without overloading students who are not only learning about academic integrity, they're learning about research methods, they're learning how to write and present, they're learning how to work in groups as well. I'm not the only person working on this. Quite coincidentally, I've found out after I started working on this about people working on academic research modules for the graduate audience. Two examples on the slides. I was asked to speak by Salim Razi for his group in Turkey about he is training PhD students about academic integrity and doing a research module with them. Unsurprisingly, I spoke about contract cheating. We had a really great conversation. I got to repurpose some of my notes I'd put together for my own group, which was quite handy. But Salim's work, he's getting those students writing individual research papers. Really excited to see how that pans out. And we've got Sarah Eaton and her team at University of Calgary have launched their new master's course on academic integrity, very much research focused. I know that because Sarah's involved, be incredibly detailed materials, be a really interesting one for people to get involved with as well, who are looking for postgraduate level qualification there. But what have we seen? I asked this question at the start: how can we work with our students' academic integrity partners? I've tried many things. We've got them involved in presentations. I've got research with them individually as well. I've got the feed into modules. But for me, it's the first time we've done something like this, an undergraduate research module, the next level of academic integrity, with the level of the materials geared very much towards the audience. I'm very happy I had this opportunity to do the pilot run this year with the smaller group. There'll be a lot more students next year. I hope we get more of an interdisciplinary approach. I don't know how this will run, whether it be in person or online, have to be adaptable, but the students can be our valued partners in research, and we can make academic integrity research open to everyone, not just to students. I encourage you to get your students involved. I encourage you to think about this if you are a student, to research things with your friends. You can get published as well, very valuable for you, but also your colleagues there. You don't have to be an academic. You can be working in administration, you can be a registrar. There are lots of opportunities. And to close, my final little motivational story. This is Conran. He worked with me last summer. I got some internal funding to essentially, Codrin's main role was to investigate how ethics and professional skills are taught across the UK. But we had some time left at the end of the project, and he worked with me at a study of the Chegg file sharing website, how that's used for contract cheating, how that's changed as a result of COVID-19. We had that published recently in International Journal of Educational Integrity. Lots of very positive press about that, about how 3 times more requests essentially were appearing on that site post pandemic compared to pre-pandemic. Some great articles. I've spoken to the Capital Forum about that, and this research we mentioned in the UK Parliament trying to change practice, and Codrin being incredibly involved with this process as well. I hope they'll be able to publish more from some of the other students I mentioned. We're going through all the process, finalising things, getting them ready. But students can do this, it is possible. And Conrad, at the end of his first year on the computing course at Imperial College London, can do this with the right support behind him. Our students can work as academic integrity researchers and practitioners there as well. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that's given you some pause for thought. Do contact me at Dr. Lancaster at Twitter. Do look at the slide archive, slideshare.net/Thomas Lancaster, and do decide where you're going to take the crossroads forward. But it's the perfect time to bring students further on board as our valued equals as academic integrity partners. Thank you.